All right, so I'm guessing if you're tuning in, you're probably in that same boat I see so many students in,
Yeah.
where it's like, all right, gotta master this English vocab for these postgraduate exams.
Yeah.
But it feels like you're staring at this giant word list, and it's just
Mhm.
like, how am I going to get all of this to
Oh, yeah.
actually stick in my brain?
Oh, yeah.
So today we're doing a deep dive into some specific words to help you really nail these down.
Absolutely.
We're looking at words from Day 8, Unit 2,
Yep.
sections 32 through 41.
That's right.
And our mission here is to give you more than just, okay, here's the definition,
Oh, exactly.
We're going to look at how these words are actually used and think about how you can, kind of weave them into your memory and make them stick.
Yeah, and really understand the nuances of these words.
Right.
Because that's what's going to help you not only in your exams, but also in your everyday usage of English.
Exactly. So let's get started with our first word, diminish.
Okay.
It's a verb, and essentially it means to become or make something smaller or less significant.
Mm-hmm.
And a basic example of this would be like, the world's resources are rapidly diminishing.
Yeah, that's a very clear example of how it's used in a general sense.
Right.
But I think it gets really interesting when we see it used in more complex contexts.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, in this sentence. Complex international economic, technological, and cultural changes could start to diminish the leading position of English as the language of the world market.
Oh, wow.
So here we're not talking about physical size.
Right.
We're talking about the importance of English as a global language
Right.
and how various factors might cause that importance to lessen over time.
It's almost like saying like the spotlight on English is
Yes.
dimming a little bit.
Fading a little bit, yeah.
Okay, so how do we remember diminish?
Well, if we break it down, we have the prefix D,
Okay.
which often means away or apart.
Right.
And then you have mini, which obviously relates to small.
Mm.
So if you put those together, diminish is like moving away from a state of being large or significant towards something smaller or less important.
I like that.
And it might be helpful to think about its opposite,
Okay.
words like increase or grow, to really solidify that contrast in your mind.
Okay, so when we're thinking about exams,
Yes.
what are some of the ways that diminish might show up?
Well, you might see it in collocations like diminish resources or diminish importance.
Right.
And in sentence completion tasks, be ready for synonyms like reduce or decrease.
Okay, right. So that was diminish. Let's move on. And I guess you could say plunge into our next word, which is
Cycles.
plunge.
Plunge.
And this word can be both a verb and a noun.
Right.
And it really gives you this image of like a sudden and rapid drop or fall.
Yeah, exactly.
A great example sentence I saw was stock markets plunged at the news of the coup.
Yeah.
So you can really picture that,
You can really feel it.
that kind of like,
That steep drop.
yeah, sharp decline.
And it has that sense of speed and intensity, which is really key.
Right.
It's not a gradual decline. It's a sudden,
It's
like you're jumping off of something.
Yeah, or like diving into.
Exactly. Diving headfirst into water.
Yeah.
That's a good analogy for
So like dive and plummet, those are all kind of.
Yeah, they're all in that same family of words that share that sense of a really rapid downward movement.
And as a noun,
Yeah.
we could say something like a plunge in profits.
Exactly. And that implies the same thing, a sudden,
Yeah.
significant decrease.
Okay, so for exams, remember that plunge can refer to both literal,
Right.
like a physical drop,
Mhm.
and then this figurative meaning of a sudden decrease, whether that's in value or numbers or whatever.
Yeah. Pay attention to the context to figure out which meaning is being used.
Okay, great. So we've talked about things going down. Now let's talk about something that might arrive at your door, which is a parcel.
Shekels.
That
Okay.
one's a noun, and basically it just means a package that's wrapped up, usually tied up.
Yeah.
And the simplest example would be like, I received a parcel in the mail.
Exactly. And it's interesting because you can also see parcel being used in the context of land.
Oh.
Like a large piece of land might be divided into smaller parcels
Right.
for distribution or ownership.
Interesting.
So it's not just limited to packages that you receive.
So if you need a memory trick, just picture that,
Yeah, that image of a neatly wrapped package
Yeah.
arriving at your doorstep.
All right, so parcel, I feel like, is pretty closely related to our next word, which is package,
Yeah, they are definitely related.
which is both a noun and a verb.
Right.
So what are the key differences between these two? I feel like that's something that could be.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a common point of confusion for learners.
Yeah.
I think the main difference is that package is a broader term.
Okay.
It can refer to any collection of items that are presented together as a unit.
Right.
So, for example, you might say, the software comes in a convenient package.
Right, like it includes, the software itself, maybe some documentation.
Exactly. The software, the documentation, maybe some additional tools,
Yeah.
all presented together.
And as a verb,
Yeah.
you might say something like, they packaged the deal carefully.
Exactly. And in that case, package takes on a more figurative meaning.
Right.
It's about presenting something in a way that's attractive and beneficial.
So even though you might get a parcel that contains a package,
Right.
package really has that sense of...
More about the contents and how they're presented.
Yeah, and that can be literal or figurative.
Exactly.
Okay, so think of parcel as the physical wrapping
Yeah.
and package as the contents and the presentation.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to remember it.
All right, so we've been talking about things arriving in packages. Let's talk about the actual act of enclosing something, which brings us to wrap.
Okay.
Verb and noun.
Mm-hmm.
Simple example.
Hmm.
She wrapped the gift in colorful paper.
Yeah, that's the literal physical act of wrapping something.
And
But we also use wrap figuratively quite often.
you're right. Okay.
Like you might say, the investigation is now wrapped up,
Okay, yeah.
meaning it's completed.
Right.
So it's finished.
So it's like you're either literally enclosing something or you're...
Now, or you're bringing something to a close.
Right. Okay. So for exams, they might test you on both the literal and figurative meaning of wrap.
Exactly. And you'll often see it in phrasal verbs like wrap up,
Right.
which means to finish or conclude something.
Okay, great. Now let's move on to a word that I feel like we hear a lot in legal contexts, which is allege.
Yeah.
It's a verb, and like the first example that comes to mind is something you'd hear on the news like, he alleged that he was innocent.
Exactly. And that's a really important point.
Yeah.
Because allege means to claim something without proof.
Right.
So it's not the same as saying someone proved something or confirmed something.
It's like they're saying it, but...
They're making the claim, but they haven't necessarily provided the evidence to back it up.
Right. And you see this a lot in news reports when they're talking about accusations or legal cases.
Yeah, and another example would be the report alleges financial mismanagement.
Right.
So again, it's a claim that needs further investigation.
So when you're preparing for your exams, especially for those reading comprehension sections that focus on news articles or legal topics,
Right.
make sure you really understand that nuance of allege.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Let's move on to pledge.
Okay.
This word can be both a verb and a noun, and we hear it a lot in the context of politics.
Yeah.
For example, the candidate pledged to lower taxes.
Right. A pledge is like a solemn promise.
Yeah.
It's a serious commitment.
And it's more serious than just like a casual,
Exactly. It has a sense of formality and obligation.
And the noun form would be something like, they made a pledge of support.
Right. And that implies the same thing, that they're making a serious commitment to support something.
Okay. And in exams, you'll likely see pledge in those contexts of politics.
Right.
Formal agreements may be charitable giving. Now let's talk about giving someone confidence or certainty, which is assure.
Okay.
It's a verb. And a common example would be, I assure you that everything will be fine.
Yeah. Assure is about removing doubt or anxiety.
Right.
You're telling someone something with confidence and conviction.
It's like giving them a sense of reassurance.
Exactly. Like the company assured customers of continued support.
Right. Like, we're here for you. Don't worry.
Exactly.
And in exams, it's important to understand that assure is specifically about providing that sense of confidence or certainty.
Yes, it's about the feeling you're trying to convey
Right.
to the person you're talking to.
Okay, so now we have a word that sounds very similar to assure, which is insure.
Okay.
Also a verb, but this one has a very specific financial connotation.
Exactly. Insure is all about protecting yourself against financial loss or damage.
So like, it's important to insure your house against fire.
Right, because if something happens to your house,
Right.
you'll be financially covered.
And another example might be, the package was insured for $500.
Right, so if the package is lost or damaged during shipping,
Right.
you can claim that amount.
So insure is all about financial security.
Yeah, and risk management.
Okay. And you'll definitely see insure in exam materials related to business,
Right.
finance,
Mhm.
risk management.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got assure, we've got insure, and now we have another one that sounds very similar, which is insure.
Okay.
Also a verb, and a common example is, please ensure that all doors are locked.
Right, so insure means to make certain that something will happen.
Yeah.
It's about guaranteeing an outcome.
Okay.
Another example would be, The new regulations aim to ensure fair competition.
Right. So you're making sure that something will definitely happen.
Exactly. It's about making something secure or certain.
Okay, so we have assure, insure, and insure. And I have to say,
Yeah.
these are words that I even sometimes get a little tripped up on.
They do sound very similar.
Right. Like, how do you really remember which is which?
Well, I think a good way to remember is to think about it like this.
Okay.
Assure is about your feelings.
Okay.
You assure someone that something is true.
Right, to put their mind at ease.
Exactly.
Okay.
Insure is about your assets.
Okay.
You insure something against financial loss.
All right, finances.
And insure is about the outcome.
Okay.
You ensure that something will happen.
Oh, that's a good way to remember it.
So feelings, finances,
Finality.
finality.
I like that.
So hopefully that helps to keep them straight.
It does. It does. Okay, so let's move on to guarantee, which can be both a verb and a noun. And this one we often see in relation to products. Like the product comes with a 1-year guarantee.
Yeah, a guarantee is a formal assurance
Right.
that something will meet certain standards or that a specific outcome will occur.
Yeah, and it often comes with like legal implications.
That's exactly. It's often legally binding.
Like you're guaranteed to get this,
Yeah, exactly.
this quality or this outcome.
And the opposite can also be true.
Oh, right.
Like, we cannot guarantee the weather.
Yeah, there are some things that are just unpredictable.
Exactly. So in your exams, pay attention to both the positive and negative uses of guarantee.
Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and talk about overcoming obstacles. And for this, we have the word conquer,
Okay.
which is a verb. And you might say something like, the army conquered the enemy territory.
Yeah, conquer implies overcoming an obstacle or defeating an opponent.
And it often involves a lot of effort.
Yes, it often suggests a significant struggle or a use of force.
Right?
But you can also use conquer in a more figurative sense.
Oh, okay.
Like you can conquer a fear or a bad habit.
Right, so like she finally conquered her fear of flying.
Exactly. So it's not just about physical battles.
Okay.
It can also be about overcoming internal challenges.
And what about the word defeat?
Defeat.
This one's both a verb and a noun.
Right.
And it's kind of the opposite of conquer in a way.
Yeah, in the competitive context, defeat is the opposite of conquer.
Like you might say, our team defeated theirs in the final.
Right.
So that's a pretty straightforward,
Straightforward victory.
And then the noun form would be something like, the proposal suffered a heavy defeat.
Exactly. So it means a loss or a failure to win.
Okay, so conquer is about overcoming.
Right.
And defeat is about...
Being overcome.
Yeah, being overcome.
Yeah.
All right, let's shift our focus now to the realm of social interactions and talk about the word offend.
Okay.
It's a verb. And a clear example would be, his remarks offended many people. So offend means to cause displeasure or anger or hurt feelings in someone.
It can also refer to an unpleasant sensory experience.
Okay.
Like the strong smell offended her nose.
But that's less common, I guess?
Yeah. The context of social interactions, it usually refers to causing emotional distress.
Right.
And when we're thinking about exams,
yeah.
especially those that focus on social dynamics, it's really important to understand the implications of using language that can be offensive.
Right. You have to be aware of how your words might affect other people.
Exactly.
Okay, so if someone is facing criticism or a threat, they might try to defend themselves.
Yeah.
Defend is a verb, and a very common example would be, the lawyer will defend her client in court.
Exactly. Defend means to protect someone or something from harm or criticism.
And it can also be used in a more literal sense.
Right.
Like, we need to defend our borders.
Yeah, that's about protecting a physical space from attack.
Right.
So you can see that defend has both literal and figurative meanings.
And on the other side of that, you have attack, which can be both a verb and a noun. And this one really represents that initiation of aggression.
Yeah, it's the opposite of defend.
So you might say, the enemy attacked at dawn.
That's a physical attack.
Right.
But you can also have verbal attacks.
Right, like she launched a verbal attack on her opponent.
Exactly.
So attack can refer to physical aggression,
right?
Verbal aggression. And in exams, you might even see it in a health context, like a disease attacking the body.
Exactly.
Okay, so now let's move into the realm of planning and strategy with the word tactic, which is a noun. And a good example would be, their main tactic was to wear down the opposition.
Yeah, a tactic is a specific action or method that you use to achieve a goal.
And it's often part of a bigger plan.
Right, it's a component of a larger strategy.
So it's like one specific move
Yeah, exactly.
you make within that bigger game plan.
Yeah, another example would be using humor can be a good tactic in negotiations.
Oh, okay. So it's like a specific tool
Right.
that you can use.
Exactly.
All right. So now let's zoom out to that bigger picture and talk about strategy.
Okay.
Also a noun. And you might say something like, the company developed a long-term marketing strategy.
Right. A strategy is a comprehensive plan
Right.
that outlines how you're going to achieve a long-term goal.
Okay.
It's like the roadmap
A roadmap
to your destination.
Okay. And you might also see it in a military context.
Yeah.
Like, the general outlined his battle strategy.
Right.
So it can be applied to many different areas.
Exactly. Any situation where you need a plan to achieve a complex goal.
So strategy is that overarching plan, and tactics are the specific
steps you take.
actions that you take
Yeah, within that plan.
to achieve that.
Exactly.
Okay, all right, let's shift gears a bit and look at a word that has a bit of a negative connotation. Nasty.
Oh, okay.
It's an adjective, and you might say something like, the weather turned nasty.
Yeah. Nasty just means unpleasant or disagreeable.
Right.
It can refer to anything that's kind of yucky or undesirable.
So it could be the weather.
Right.
It could be like, he made a nasty remark.
Yeah, so it can also describe something that's unkind or mean-spirited.
Right.
So it's a pretty versatile word for expressing negativity.
Okay, now let's move on to contrast, which can be both a noun and a verb. And as a noun, you might say, there's a stark contrast between the two brothers.
Yeah, contrast highlights the differences between two or more things.
And it really emphasizes that difference.
Exactly. It's about showing how things are distinctly different from each other.
And as a verb, you might say, the dark colors contrast sharply with the white walls.
Right. So in that case, contrast is the act of making those differences more apparent.
And you see contrast a lot in,
analytical writing.
Yeah, analytical writing.
Where authors are comparing and contrasting different ideas.
Yeah, to make their point stronger.
Exactly.
Now, we have a word that's very closely related to contrast, which is comparison. And this is a noun.
Right.
And you might say something like, the study involves a comparison of different teaching methods.
Yeah, comparison is the act of examining both the similarities and the differences between things.
Okay.
So it's not just about the differences.
Right.
It's about looking at the whole picture.
And another way you might see it used is like, in comparison to last year, sales are up.
Right. So in that case, you're using comparison to assess relative value.
Okay. And comparison is really important for exams.
Oh, yeah.
Because a lot of the tasks you'll be asked to do involve analyzing,
right,
evaluating, comparing different things.
So make sure you understand how to use comparison effectively.
Okay, great. So let's move on now to desirable, which is an adjective.
Okay.
And it describes something that is wanted, wished for, beneficial.
Yeah, but basically anything that's seen as a good thing.
So, for example, a high salary is a desirable feature of the job.
Right. Everyone wants a high salary.
Right.
So it's definitely a desirable feature.
And you might also see it used in a more general sense, like strong communication skills are highly desirable.
Exactly. So desirable can be used to describe anything that's considered advantageous or beneficial.
Okay, great. Now let's talk about keen.
Okay.
Another adjective. And this one primarily conveys a strong enthusiasm or interest. So, for example, you might say, she's a keen swimmer.
Yeah, she really enjoys swimming.
Right.
She's enthusiastic about it.
And another example would be he has a keen interest in history.
Right. He's really fascinated by history.
Yeah, he's really into it.
Exactly.
Now, keen can also mean sharp.
Yeah.
Like, the knife has a keen edge.
Right.
But that meaning is less common.
Yeah, especially when we're talking about people.
Right.
Keen usually refers to their level of enthusiasm.
So just pay attention to the context.
Exactly. The context will tell you which meaning is intended.
Yeah. Right. Now, we have a word that's very similar to keen in that it implies enthusiasm, and that's eager.
Okay.
Also an adjective.
Mm-hmm.
And a good example would be the children were eager to open their presents.
Yeah, they're excited, and they can't wait to see what's inside.
Right.
So eager suggests both enthusiasm and anticipation.
Right.
And often there's a sense of wanting something to happen.
Okay.
Like he's eager to please.
Right. He wants to make other people happy.
So
eager often describes someone looking forward to something specific.
Yeah, there's a sense of anticipation and excitement.
Right. Let's move on to discern, which is a verb.
Okay.
And this word means to perceive or recognize or understand something that's not immediately obvious.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about seeing or understanding something subtle or hidden.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it was difficult to discern the truth.
Right, because the truth was obscured or hidden in some way.
Right.
And another example would be she could discern a figure in the distance.
Yeah, so she could barely make it out, but she could still perceive that there was something there.
So discern often implies careful or insightful observation.
Yes. It's about using your perception and your judgment to understand something that's not immediately clear.
All right, now let's talk about despair, which can be both a noun and a verb.
Okay.
And as a noun, it represents a really strong feeling of hopelessness.
Yeah, feeling of utter loss of hope.
So you might say he felt a sense of despair after failing the exam.
Right, he felt like all was lost.
And the verb form would be something like, don't despair, there's still a chance.
Right, so you're encouraging someone not to give up hope.
So despair is a really powerful word for expressing that feeling of just...
complete hopelessness.
Yeah, and when someone is feeling despair, they might act desperately.
Right.
Which is an adverb, like, he desperately needed help.
Yeah, so desperately means doing something with great urgency or intensity.
Right.
Because you're in a really difficult situation.
Like you're at your wit's end.
Exactly.
And another example would be, she fought desperately to stay awake.
Right, so she's struggling with all her might to overcome this feeling of drowsiness.
So desperately really emphasizes the intensity of the action or the feeling.
Yeah, it shows that someone is putting in a huge effort.
Okay, now let's talk about different ways of looking at things, starting with scan.
Okay.
Which is both a verb and a noun.
Right.
As a verb, you might say, I quickly scanned the newspaper headlines.
Yeah, so you're looking over something quickly to get the main points.
Right.
Without reading every single word.
And it also has a more technical meaning in the context of medicine or technology.
Right.
Like, the doctor ordered a brain scan.
So in that case, scan refers to a medical imaging technique.
Right, so it's important to pay attention to the context.
Exactly. The context will tell you which meaning of scan is intended.
Okay, now let's move on to scandal, which is a noun.
Okay.
And we often hear this word in the news,
Yeah.
like the politician was forced to resign after the scandal.
A scandal is a public event or action that causes a lot of outrage or shame.
Right. It's like a big controversy.
Exactly. It usually involves some kind of wrongdoing or immoral behavior.
And another example might be there was a financial scandal involving the company.
Right. So that's a situation where a company has done something dishonest or illegal.
And it's become public knowledge.
Right. And it's damaged their reputation.
Okay, so scandal is a really powerful word for describing those events that cause widespread disapproval.
Exactly.
All right, so we talked about scan, and now we have skim.
Okay.
Which is a verb, and it's similar to scan in the context of reading.
Yeah.
Like you might say, I only had time to skim through the report.
Right. So you're reading quickly just to get the general idea.
Without really absorbing all the details.
Exactly. It's a useful reading strategy when you need to get the gist of something quickly.
And it's important to distinguish skim from scan.
Yeah.
Because scan is more about looking for specific information.
Right.
Whereas skim is just about getting that overall sense of the text.
Yeah, it's more about the big picture.
Okay, now let's talk about different ways of looking at things. And for this, we have glare.
Okay.
Which can be both a verb and a noun.
Right.
And as a verb, you might say, she glared at him angrily.
Yeah. A glare is an intense stare.
Right.
It usually conveys anger or disapproval.
It's like that look that could kill.
Exactly. It's not a friendly look.
And glare can also refer to a harsh, bright light.
Right.
Like the sun glared off the snow.
So in that case, it's about the intensity of the light.
It's almost blinding.
Yeah, it can be painful to look at.
Okay, so glare can be a look, or it can be a light.
And both are intense and unpleasant.
All right, now let's talk about glimpse, which can be both a verb and a noun.
Okay.
And it basically just means a quick look.
Yeah, a very brief look.
Like you might say, I caught a glimpse of him as he went past.
Right, so you only saw him for a second.
Yeah, it's like a fleeting moment.
Exactly.
And another example would be she had a fleeting glimpse of the ocean.
Yeah, so it was just a quick view, not a prolonged look.
And glimpse is often used to create a sense of mystery or intrigue.
Yeah, like you're only getting a small piece of the puzzle.
Now, we have a word that's very similar to glimpse, which is glance.
Okay.
Also a verb and a noun.
Right.
And you might say something like, he glanced at his watch.
Yeah, that's a quick look, often to check something quick, like the time or a notification.
And another example might be, she gave him a quick glance before turning away.
Right, so it's a brief look in his direction.
So glance is similar to glimpse, but maybe a little bit more intentional.
Yeah, it's not quite as fleeting or accidental as a glimpse.
Right.
It can be a deliberate choice to look at something quickly.
Okay, so we've got glare, we've got glimpse, we've got glance, and now we have gaze.
Gaze.
Which can be both a verb and a noun.